Hi guys, welcome to today's lesson. We're looking at compound interest. If you haven't looked at the simple interest lesson, please go back and look at that one first. This will be a bit slightly long, I would imagine this lesson to be, as it's a bit more complex. I'm looking at all different types of compound interest questions, particularly some of the more challenging ones. So first of all, what I would like to address is what is compound interest and what is different between compound and simple. Now, if this question, first of all, you might recognize the difference in the question that it has this added part that says compounding annually. So far we've looked at simple interest, okay, and I will look at simple interest first, where we have a principal amount, okay, of $1,000. We have a rate of 0.1 and we have an N of 3 years. So for simple interest, I would simply look at this and say, okay, well, $1,000 times 0.1 times it by 3. Remember, 10% in this case of $1,000 is $100, which means I'm earning $100 for each year for 3 years, which gives me a total of $300 of interest, or a total amount of $1,300. Now, simple interest means that I'm earning $100 per year. So it doesn't matter if I do it for 1 year, for 3 years, for 10 years, for 1,000 years, I'm only ever earning $100. Now, theoretically, you might say, well, isn't that a bit unfair? Because let's think of it this way. Let's say I work it out for my first year, okay? I'm going to put, say, we'll say A1, year 1, right? Let's say I've got $1,000. I'm timesing it by 0.1%, so 0.1, which is my 10%. We know that generates, 1,000, that generates that $100 that we spoke about. So at the end of the first year, I've actually got $1,100 in my bank account. Now that's the same, obviously, for the simple interest question. But what about the next year? Should I not get 10% of not the $1,000 that I invested originally, but of the amount that's currently in my bank account? So theoretically, for my second year, should I not be charged the 10% or earn 10% of that $1,100? If that was the case, I'm now going to earn $110, which is slightly more than what I would have had that first year. So at the end of the second year, I'm going to have my original amount of $1,100 plus the $110, which gives you $1,210. Which, if I then look at that same thing now for the third year that I've got it in there for, so let's call it A3, I've now got $1,210. Let's times that by the 10%. I'm now going to earn $121 of interest, which again is slightly different to the 110, which is slightly different to the 100. Which means at the end of that third year, I'm now going to have $1,331. Now let's look at that first example of the compound interest, so the simple interest question. Here I had $1,300. Here I've got $1,331. Now look, I understand that's fairly similar, but, you know, any extra money is better than nothing. Having it calculated this way, I get an extra $31 of interest. Now, on a big scale, that's going to be a fairly significant difference. So what is the difference of simple interest and compound interest? Well, simple interest, the interest is fixed. It's worked off or based off that very first investment, okay, or that very first year, should I say. Whereas the compound interest, it is calculated, well, at the end of the compounding period. In this case, it says compounding annually, which means that we're going to calculate the interest after each individual year. So after the first year, we calculate it, we have $1,100. After the second year, we calculate it, and we add it on, we now have $1,210. After the third year, we calculate it, we now have $1,331. So it's calculated more often. All right, so that's the big difference. So if I had to do this for 10 years, that's going to be quite time consuming, okay, and certainly it is. So obviously there's going to be a short way of doing that. Now, we've got our principal amount of $1,000, all right, I guess we've got our P. If I wanted to make it exactly, let's say skip from 1,000 times 0.1, equals 100 plus the $1,000. It's quite time consuming, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have times it by, let's say, 1.1. You might remember increasing by percentages. That's the 100%, which is my $1,000, and the 10% is $100. But often what we do, we write it as 1 plus R, because I don't know what the R is going to be. If I'm talking about a general term, R could be 10%. In this case, it'd be 1.1. It could be 15%, so it'd be 1.15. It could be 5%, so it'd be 1.05. Whichever way, I've got my 100%, so my total amount, plus the interest rate. And then, if you recognize that I times it by, let's say, the 1.1 for the first year. If I want the second year, I'm going to times it by 1.1 again. The third year, 1.1 a second time. So theoretically, for this amount here, I could have actually said $1,000 times 1.1 times 1.1 times 1.1, which equals the $1,331. The quick way of doing it would just be 1.1 to the power of 3, which is my end value. So in a long story short, my total amount is given by having my principal multiplying it by 1 plus R to the power of n. And that is my compound interest formula. There are lots of videos on how to get compound interest formula. I'm trying to do it quite quickly, so I apologize if that was a little bit unsure. This is more going to be about how to apply that formula. So certainly, if you would like to have a bit more time on how to get that formula, please ask me and I will do a separate video. But let's look at a question now. So we know that the formula is P brackets 1 plus R to the power of n, where R is my rate, n is my number of compounding periods. So of compounding periods. And my R is my interest rate. My P is my principal, etc., etc. Pretty much similar to what we have had previously for simple interest. So A is equal to my principal in this case. It says I invest $600 at 6% per annum compounding annually. Well, compounding annually is there for two reasons. Number one, it tells me it's compound interest, but also it tells me how many times it's being calculated over a year. In this case, it's just been compounding once a year. So I've got 1 plus 0.06, because it's 6% per year, and it's only happening once a year, to the power of n. Well, I know it's been compounded once per year, but I'm doing it for 5 years. So if it's being done once per year for 5 years, it's being calculated 5 times. So now all I need to do is just simply put that into my calculator and find the actual answer. So in this case, A will equal $802.94. Now obviously if you did it through the simple interest formula, it'd be slightly different, because if I have found the 6% of the $600, we'd only be earning $36 for each of those 5 years. So this is obviously a little bit more. Now the question says find the interest earned. Be very careful, because the simple interest was I equals, okay? If you remember that, I equals. So it calculated the interest straight away. This is A equals. So this is not the interest I'm earning. This is what my amount has grown to. So if I want to find my interest, well, we're just going to subtract this original amount, the principal. And I'm going to be left with an interest of $202.94. Okay, now some people use the formula I equals A minus P, which is what we've just done there, the amount, take away the principal, but to be honest, it's pretty much common sense. Alright, so let's have another look at a different question. Now, they are obviously going to get more challenging, and it does get more challenging than simple interest, I'm afraid. So again, how do I know it's compound interest? Well, I see this word compounding monthly. That's a little bit different, isn't it? Last one was compounding annually. Alright, so this time when I'm investing my $600 at 6% per annum, remember 6% over an entire year, the interest is being calculated per month, so at the end of each month. Well, that means if I've got 6% over a whole year, then what percent am I being calculated over a particular month? So what you might say, well, if that's over for a whole year, well, couldn't I just divide that by 12 to find my interest rate per month? And that's certainly correct. So that'd be 0.06 over 12. Now, that comes back to the reason why I like decimals and not fractions. Because imagine putting that as a fraction, 6 over 100, and then dividing it by 12 to find the monthly interest rate. It's going to be a bit more challenging. The other thing that would change here apart from my interest rate is it's happening 12 times a year, but we're doing it for 5 years. So if I'm, for my end value, if I'm doing it 12 times a year, because remember it's a monthly amount, for 5 years, we're actually calculating it 60 times. So when I got my original formula, p brackets 1 plus r the power of n, two amounts can change depending on the compounding period. If it's annually, not a problem. Okay, it only happens once a year, so it's percent per annum and it's just for 5 years. But in this case, it's compounding monthly. So my rate, we saw here, we had to divide it by 12 to find out what it was per 1 month. And then my end changed because I was doing it for 12 months for 5 times or 5 years. So we've got here A equals $600, 1 plus, now my interest rate again was 6% per annum per year, but we're doing it per month. So I need to divide it by 12. And that means I need to work out, well, how many months in total am I doing it for? Well, I've got 12 months a year, again there, for 5 years, which means a total of 60 months. So I know that can be a little bit confusing, and that's where the compound interest certainly becomes more challenging than what you've had for the simple interest. Now, all I'm going to do now, and I'm doing it as I speak, I'm just putting that into my calculator left to right, and then if I do that, we're going to get an answer, in this case, of $809.31. So $809.31. Now you may have noticed that I used the same numbers as that previous question. That previous question, we were compounding it annually as we did just before. And let's just have a look at what my amount was. We returned, my apologies, we returned an amount of $802.94. But then when instead of calculating it annually, I calculated it monthly, we now have $809. So we have a slightly bigger amount. And that's because I've invested the exactly same amount at the exact same sort of time frame over 5 years. But because the interest was calculated more times, then obviously we had a bit more interest. Only slightly more, but certainly, as I said before, more money for nothing is going to be a good thing. Now notice it didn't ask me for the interest earned, it just asked me for the value of my investment. So my value is simply $809. If it had have asked for the interest, I could have gone ahead and said my interest is $209.31. However, they didn't ask me for that, so that's not my answer. Alright, we've got 2 more questions to go. Question 3. I borrowed $10,000 for 3 years. If I'm charged an interest rate of 8% per annum, there's that word again, compounding, biannually. Find the amount of the investment. I wonder what biannually means. Last time we had monthly, then it was annually. What biannually is? Well, bicycle is 2 wheels. You can probably think of other words with bi in it. Biceps, because there's 2 muscles on your arms. Yeah, so bi means 2. So what is actually happening is saying that we're going to calculate it twice a year. So after, I guess, each 6 months. Sometimes this can actually be called, I'll put an arrow here, 6 monthly. Just means it's happening twice a year, which is obviously very important. So when I put my A equals P brackets 1 plus R the power of n, the 2 danger zones we have, as we saw from that last question, was my rate and my end value. They're the 2 things that could change depending on my compounding period. Now, I've already said that it's compounding biannually, so yes, we'll be changing the rate and we'll be changing the n. So let's go through our question. A equals my principal, $10,000. 1 plus, now my interest rate was 8%, but that was per annum. So 0.08, but that was per year, but we want to calculate it for each 6 months or twice a year. So I'm going to divide it by 2. And then if I'm doing it twice a year for 3 years, that means I'm doing it a total of 6 times. And a little bit of a hint, generally speaking, whatever you divide your rate by, you'll most likely times your n by. Okay, it just happens that way. Not every single time, but pretty much most of the time. And that's the hard part. Okay, the next part, as we saw that previous question, we're simply putting 10,000 in our calculator, 1 plus your fraction button, 0.08 over 2, not 12, and then to the power of, in this case it's going to be 6, and we get an answer of $12,000, 653.19. Now, has it asked for the interest, or has it asked for the final amount? Well, it has asked me how much interest I'm going to have to pay. So let's take that away, or take $10,000 away from that, which is our principal amount, which leaves me with an interest of $2,653.19. And unfortunately, this time I wasn't investing it. I was borrowing the money, which means that I pay back the $10,000, but with that added amount of $2,653.19. Okay, so hopefully you're getting the hang of things. The last question is kind of like the last couple of simple interest questions I had. It's going to be a bit slightly different. So, compounding quarterly, what do you reckon that means? 4 times a year. So straight away I think my interest rate is going to be 0.12 over 4. My n value, well, it's 4 times a year for 2 years. So it's going to happen 8 times. Some people like to do that separately. Sometimes people like to actually calculate that on its own. I don't usually. I just put it into the formula. So I've got my formula. A is equal to P brackets 1 plus R to the power of n. Now what does the question ask? It says, how much do I need to invest? Hold on. It's asking me how much I want to invest, which means that it's looking for the P, which means they must have told me what the total amount was. So it says, how much do I need to invest to have a total of 6,000 AK? So this is more of an equations question. I'm going to put the 6,000 where the A is. I don't know what the P is. I do know that my R is 0.12 over 4. Remember, it's 12% per annum, but I'm doing it quarterly. And then I'm doing it 4 times a year for 2 years, which means I'm doing it 8 times. So how do I now somehow separate the P from this bracket here? Because remember, I want to get P by itself. Well, hopefully you can recognize there's a times in between. So the opposite of times is divide. So what I'm simply going to do is divide that whole left side by the 1 plus 0.12 to the power of, so over 4 to the power of 8. And that's all it's going to be. So actually, I mean, it looked more challenging, but to be honest, it's not. Now, often on my calculator, because I don't like having fractions over fractions, I'll type it in as 6,000 divided by, and then hit my fraction key. Oh, actually, I don't need that. I can actually put my fraction key. It's not too bad. So my apologies. Do the divide by or do the over sign. It doesn't actually matter which way you do it. It'll come out nicely either way. So I'm just typing into my calculator now. So my apologies. Make sure it's over 4 and to the power of 8. And then press equals. And we come out with an amount of P is equal to $4,736.46. Has it asked me for interest? No, remember we didn't have that. It just asked me how much money I need to invest, which is my $4,736. Often too, folks, you'll pretty much see if your answer is like $100,000 and you're only earning $6,000, it's going to be a bit out of whack. You can generally tell how much money you've if it's close to your answer or not close to your answer. Now, they could have also asked me how much interest would I be earning, because remember, I've got $6,000 as my final amount. You could then take $6,000 away or vice versa to see how much actually money I'm making on that. Look, that's a pretty tough question. As I said, it's pretty a long lesson here, so I apologize. It's just going over the 20-minute mark. Just with this, remember, your number one thing is you need to recall your formula. A equals P brackets 1 plus R to the power of N. And the danger zone with this style of question is that you must look at your R and your N and make sure what the compounding period is. That initial question, we had percent per annum, but it was compounding annually, so there was no need to change it. But if it's percent per annum and it's compounding in a different format, monthly, weekly, fortnightly, biannually, 6 monthly, which is the same thing, all those sorts of things, we then need to go ahead and change the R and change the N, because your percent per annum and your compounding period must be in the same amount. Okay, guys, I hope this sort of made a bit this made sense. Otherwise, it was a waste of our time, but hopefully it wasn't. Give me a bit of feedback. Let me know if this was clear or not clear, and I can modify to suit you. Thanks, guys, for stopping by, and I'll speak to you later on.